Hi kids, part 3. Sorry this is taking so long, but each video is just taking hours to upload onto Canvas. It's this horrible internet that I'm dealing with. All right, we left off with the extremes of intelligence. We talked about the savant syndrome, which is one extreme in terms of high intelligence. And now, just because you are a savant doesn't mean you're going to get a high intelligence score. You are, in certain cases, going to be able to exhibit extreme sort of abilities. Maybe it's to play the piano, play the violin, do math equations, but yet in other things, there would be a lot of disabilities. And so they wouldn't necessarily score well on an IQ test. But a savant has these extreme abilities. On the other end of the spectrum are people that are intellectually disabled. We used to use the term mental retardation. It was not a derogatory term in the beginning. It was just a word to describe this particular group, the lowest 3% in terms of IQ and the IQ score. But once people start to use the term in a derogatory way, they have to change the terminology. So now it's intellectual disability. But if you're reading older literature, you'll run into the term mental retardation. Pretty much here you have the lowest 3% here. You can see that there's a couple of standard deviations from the mean. And in terms of the extremes of intelligence, we see men at the extreme. So you're going to see more men that are intellectually disabled than women, but you're also going to see more men that are geniuses than women. Having said that, women can be geniuses and are, and women, of course, can be intellectually disabled. But it's interesting. The average IQ is the same for males and females, but we see more men on both extremes. So there are more boys that qualify for special education services than girls, and there are more boys that qualify in the genius range that would be part of maybe the Mensa organization. Now, there is a misconception that if you do qualify for special education services, that you do have an intellectual disability. That is not true. There's a lot of kids that have above average IQs and abilities that still qualify for special services. Okay, also, when we're talking about the extremes of intelligence, what comes up is Down syndrome. And of course, this is a mild to severe intellectual disability associated with physical disorders caused by an extra copy of chromosome 21. These kids are happy and delightful and very engaging. They can be at Charlottesville High School, usually in our self-contained class. Sometimes they get mainstreamed into general education classes. That might be art classes or chorus classes. But at Charlottesville High School a couple of years ago, we had a girl that earned her high school diploma by passing all of her SOLs. And we have kids that really are not, intellectually disabled, that haven't been able to pass enough SOLs to actually earn a high school diploma. So you never really know what people are capable of, especially when some people are trying and other people aren't. Okay, basically there are some physical characteristics that you might notice. The eyes might be spread out a little bit further than usual. The tongue is thicker and maybe attached differently, causing them to speak a little bit different. The back of the neck might be thicker. They're shorter and maybe squattier in stature. There might be some webbing of the toes, hearing problems, and maybe a little bit of heart problems. But these kids are living longer lives than ever before. So we're really figuring out how we can place them in environments that are healthy so that they can thrive. Here we have the level of intellectual disability. These terms over here used to be used with the term mental retardation, so moderate mental retardation. Now it's intellectual disability, and you could read this over on your own. At Charlottesville High School, we will see kids with mild intellectual disabilities, and maybe every once in a while we would see a kid with moderate intellectual disabilities. They would not be mainstreamed into any general education classes, and some of our special education teachers and aides might even have to work with people that are in diapers and they don't have that type of control over their bodily functions. Okay, in terms of gifted children, basically, there was a misconception that gifted children were not well adjusted, didn't have friends, were, socially, they weren't up to par with other kids, and they found that in general that is not true, that usually they are healthy, well adjusted, and successful. Okay, genetic influences. The closer you are related to someone genetically, the more likely you're going to share intellectual abilities. So if you look at this chart right here, identical twins raised together, wow, that's a very high correlation there. And then identical twins raised apart, fraternal twins raised together, siblings raised together. So there's no difference between the fraternal twins here and siblings in terms of DNA. They are full siblings, but again, they're sharing more of the same environment because they're in the womb together, and they're probably going to be going through developmental milestones together in the same environment. So basically, in a nutshell, the more closely related you are biologically, the more likely you're going to share intelligence abilities with that particular relative. So if you're adopted, chances are that your intellect is going to be closer to your biological parents' intellect than your adopted parents' intellect. But environment is going to make a difference. So, here you have, in one large Swedish study, children adopted into wealthier families with more educated parents had IQ scores averaging 4.4 higher than their non-adopted biological siblings. So 4.4 is something to notice, but yet it's not overwhelming. So that enriched environment is not going to dramatically change IQ scores, even though it does do some difference. And of course, the more neglected or mistreated the person would be, if the particular person getting adopted, suffered from that, the more influence that nurturing, rich environment would be on their intelligence scores. Okay, yes, there is a rate of heritability when it comes to intellect. I think it's easy to see with intellect, just like it is with height. How do we figure this out? Well, of course, we figure all of this out with twin studies. And, is there an intellect gene? And they think it's polygenetic, so controlled by 2 or more genes. Okay, that's pretty much the same chart there. As years went by in their adoptive families, children's verbal ability scores became more like their biological parents' scores. So, that's the interplay between nature and nurture. And as the years go on, these kids seem to demonstrate traits of their biological parents more than their adopted parents. Okay, kids that are deprived. I believe this is a picture of a child in a Romanian orphanage who was deprived of a lot of social contact. And when that happens, these kids can have delayed development, meeting developmental milestones later than the cohort that's getting the attention from their parents and their caregivers. Also, they found that these kids can suffer from social dwarfism, and that might be related to that pituitary gland that gets activated when you have human contact. So touching and nurturing and holding and cuddling with the babies is important. Okay, is there a difference between males and females in intellect? Very little. The average is 100 IQ score for both males and females, but we do see more males at the extremes. And if you look at like men's organizations or organizations for geniuses, there seems to be a higher membership with men, even though the women are there. Men seem to excel in math and spatial aptitudes, but women have a lot going for them as well. They seem to be better spellers, have better verbal ability, nonverbal ability, including emotion detecting abilities. And we talked about that, how women can be slightly, whenever we talk about the differences between men and women, it's not big differences. They're slight differences, but they're there. You can notice them. All right. So as gender equity has increased in the United States, math SAT scores between men and between the boys and girls are becoming closer and closer. So if you go back to the 1970s, which is even before my time, and I'm old, 13 to 1, or the amount of people who are scoring 700 or above in terms of boys to girl ratio. Now it's down to 3 to 1. There's still gender equity, inequity. So as society becomes more equitable, you're going to see that number come down to, that it's the same between men and women, with a very slight difference probably in the favor of men. Okay, racial differences in IQ score. Basically what it comes down to is that, you're going to see a 15% difference between average IQ scores for white and African Americans. But then if you look at our society, what are the environmental differences between a white cohort versus a black cohort? And, you talk about white privilege, versus, the effects of slavery and segregation and racism and discrimination. So people don't think that there is anything, that's really there in terms of intellectual capability between the races. What they think is that the differences in IQ score is based on environmental factors. And there was a study once done for South Koreans. So Koreans that were, in Japan that got tested for IQ, where they're faced with a lot of discrimination, scored below the average when compared to the Japanese cohort. But if you were to test South Koreans in Korea or in the United States, they were scoring a lot higher. The only difference, because of the ethnic background is the same, the only difference is the environment. So in an environment where they were not faced with discrimination, they're scoring the same as the majority. But in a situation where they were faced with discrimination, prejudicial thinking, they were scoring a lot less. Okay. All right, and that's more of that. Okay. And that's more the same. Stereotype threat. So stereotype threat is a self-confirming concern that one will be evaluated based on a negative stereotype. Okay, so this doesn't mean that when you go in to take the test, that the test is biased, the people administering the test are biased, or that you will be it will be scored in an unfair way. This is in your own mind, meaning because you have grown up in a society where there are stereotypes that look down upon your particular cohort, you're going to go in there and have that weighing on you, and it's going to cause you to do worse on the test than if that stereotype didn't exist. So women might go into a test thinking they're not going to do well in math, and African Americans might go into a test thinking, oh my gosh, 70 or 90% of the people in this room are white. They're going to ace it and I'm not going to do well, and it's in their own mind. The effects of the stereotype. The stereotype is there, but their ability to do well, and the fact that the test, the administration, and the scoring is not biased, doesn't overcome the effects of that stereotype on their mind, their thinking, and their ability to perform. And that's it. So we're done Unit 11. We've covered all of the content that's going to be on the AP exam. So the units that you're not going to be tested on is Unit 14 on social psychology and Units 12 and 13 on psychological disorders and therapeutic approaches towards psychological disorders. I'm posting review material for the next module, and some of that review material was made years past, and so you might see some terms on social psych and psychological disorders. It's not going to hurt you, but what's going to be on the test is when we compare it to the Myers textbook is Units 1 through 11. Okay, 1 through 11, and we've covered all of it now. Now that I've got these videos done, later today I'm going to make up a Canvas quiz that covers some questions on Units 10 and 11, personality and intelligence, and I hope you take it and you'll get your score and you'll be ready to start reviewing Units 1 through 11. I hope you're well. I miss you. I hope I can see you in the fall. But look for the